good morning, everybody. And thanks, Janine, for joining us, and to Mary Alice and Irina and the colleagues from USAID, colleagues from the media, thanks again for coming out. It's not a very nice day, so thanks for coming through the rain to join us here today. WFP staff who are here, also colleagues from the warehouse in particular who've made this possible that we do this here today. On behalf of the United Nations World Food Programme, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Harare Warehouse to officially launch USAID support to the Lean Season Assistance Programme for the period January to March 2024. At WFP Zimbabwe, our goal is to ensure that everybody in the country has access to a variety of nutritious food and can always consume the recommended amounts. However, it's not a reality for many people, and more so during the lean season. The Zimbabwe Vulnerability Assessment Committee report warns that 2.7 million people will not have enough cereal to eat during this first quarter of 2024. This year's lean season coincides with the El Niño weather phenomenon, where Zimbabwe is facing erratic rainfall and high temperatures, meaning we could see low production and a further increasing food insecurity during the remainder of this year. Therefore, this assistance is critical for many people across the country. We appreciate USAID's $11.3 million contribution on behalf of the American people as we seek to support families in Zimbabwe. The assistance we are acknowledging today, which includes cereals, pulses, and fortified vegetable oil, is an important contribution to help the most vulnerable people in rural areas to meet their nutritional needs. The US assistance will cover close to 230,000 people of the total 265,000 people targeted by WFP over the coming months. Through this lean season assistance, the collective efforts of the National Food Deficit Mitigation Programme in partnership with the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare aims to reach 2.7 million people over the next 3 months. We've mapped out areas where people require food assistance. We identified households and individuals in need and registered them to receive support. Our teams are currently on the ground working with our NGO partners World Vision, Caritas and the Mwenezi Development Training Center in Buhira, Mangwe, Chivi and Mwenezi. Each person will receive 8.5 kilos of grains, 1.7 kilos of pulses, and 0.6 kilos of oil during each monthly distribution. The receipt of food assistance is unconditional and free of charge. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of work goes into this program, and we cannot take for granted the many people who work tirelessly to ensure that those who need it the most can feed themselves and their family. I therefore would like to start by thanking all the transporters and other service providers who make it possible for us to work in Zimbabwe and to get the food to the communities for distribution to the vulnerable households. I also want to express gratitude to our partners on the ground who ensure that we can undertake this important activity efficiently and effectively. And that also includes government at all levels, from the central, provincial, the district level, and the councils in the various wards. I also want to say thank you to my own team here in the warehouse and across the many different sites, including our Harare office and our 3 field offices in Harare, Masvingo and Bulawayo, for their dedication and their service to the communities. And once again, I would like to thank USAID for their significant contribution, which undoubtedly will save lives. Now, before I conclude, I want to recognize and commend the efforts of the many communities across Zimbabwe for the work they are doing towards improving their food security, for looking after one another, and for caring for the most vulnerable among them. As WFP, we are proud to partner with communities in our rural and urban resilience programs, and the remarkable community gardens are growing a variety of crops and vegetables to ensure their plates have adequate diversity. And urban farmers are producing mushrooms and chickens for themselves and their neighbors. This year, 2024, is not going to be an easy year, as the El Niño weather phenomenon will greatly impact on the success of their food production efforts. And while we stand ready to provide food assistance to those who need it the most, We are also committed to its continuing transformative resilience activities, climate action, and anticipatory risk management. Through our partnership with communities, we will one day meet our goal of zero hunger for all people in Zimbabwe. So thank you all once again for taking your time to come out here today, and I look forward to continuing our relationship with USAID as we strive to save and change lives in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
I am honored to be here with you at the World Food Program warehouse, accompanied by my colleague, our WFP country representative, Francesca Edelman, and USAID's Humanitarian Assistance and Resilience Office Director and team. Thank you all. As my colleague has mentioned, we're all aware of the erratic rainfall and drought caused by the El Niño climate pattern. This has impacted the planting season as well as the 2024 harvest and created deteriorating conditions for cattle and other livestock. Today, I'm very happy to be with you to announce $11.27 million to the World Food Program's Lean Assistance Portfolio through the generous support of the American people. As my colleague has noted, United States assistance will provide monthly food baskets. This assistance will cover approximately 230,000 insecure people in the drought-prone districts of Manyezi, Mangwe, Chivi, and Buhera from January to March, the peak of this lean season. Each participant will receive this monthly in-kind commodities of cereal, pulses, and vegetable oils, as my colleague has noted. Since the year 2000, USAID has worked with the World Food Program to improve food security for millions of Zimbabweans. And I want to highlight that in addition to our programs that address the short-term needs, such as this lean season assistance, we're also working together with Zimbabweans to support long-term goals. For example, US assistance promotes climate-smart agricultural practices, helps farmers to access agricultural inputs and link them to markets where they could sell their produce, supports communities to protect and manage community-shared natural resources, and facilitates the development of extension services for smallholder farmers. USAID is committed to continue to strengthen community resilience and accelerate sustainable development, which empowers Zimbabweans to better cope with the stressors, such as the drought caused by the El Niño climate pattern. Linking farmers to local markets is integral to increasing their production and improving livelihoods. I want to acknowledge World Food Program's source some of this year's commodities from local companies, who in turn source the produce from local smallholder farmers. For example, some of the oil that will be distributed under the Lean Season Assistance Program is from a local cooking oil manufacturer, Zim Gold. Zim Gold has contracts with smallholder farmers in Manicaland province. Many of these farmers have been beneficiaries of resilience building activities that have trained them in contract farming, price trends, and marketing, and good agronomic practices in sunflower production. In fact, Zim Gold registered 969 farmers from 48 producer groups in Buhera and Chipinge districts to grow over 900 hectares of sunflowers for this cropping season. Under this program, 997 metric tons of locally grown white sorghum were procured through peak trading from Mbire, Rushinga, and Muzarabani that USAID will help distribute in food-deficient areas during the lean season. As part of our country development cooperation strategy for Zimbabwe, USAID will continue to strengthen community resilience and accelerate sustainable development, which empowers Zimbabweans to better cope with this drought. I would like to sincerely thank our colleagues, the World Food Program, the partners and my team at USAID for the shared commitment to the people of Zimbabwe. I'm grateful that in our partnership, we share the same vision to help Zimbabweans transition from chronic vulnerability to a more resilient and inclusive society. Thank you again for coming, and thank you again to World Food Programme.
Good morning, Farah Msaka MP. I just want to find out, first of all, the funding gap that we have, and whether there are any global pressures right now that are contributing to that funding gap. And number two, the total number of people that you need to help, 2.7 million. How does this compare to the same period, maybe last season or so? Therefore, now I don't know.
Okay, can we just take that question? Okay, I'll start with the last one first, because I think that's maybe the easier one. And so the 2.7 million people is an estimate that was developed by the Food and Nutrition Council and the Zimbabwe Vulnerability Assessment Committee on the basis of an assessment that they have done in May. And what they do is at that time they predict how many people, how much food they have and how long that food will last them. Or what income they have and what opportunity that gives them to purchase food down the line. So the 2.7 is an estimate that was made in, say, June, July last year, and applied to the period January to March this year. So last year, the number was quite a bit higher. It was about 3.8 million people. And that number was the result of the harvest that came before. Right? So what we are dealing with today is the results of the people who don't have enough to eat because of not having had enough harvest before. Now, if we compare the 2.7, 3.8, it was 2.8. If we go even further back in time, remember the time that we had Cyclone Idai, we had droughts, we had COVID. And that's when the numbers went as high, sometimes as 5 million. Now, it's important to look at these trends, so I think it's a really good question to ask, because the reason why we're so worried about El Niño today is for the numbers that we're expecting, in terms of numbers of people who will not have enough food, from, let's say, October onwards. And then again, the peak between January and March could go far above the 2.7 that we have predicted for this period. So the historical trends analysis is absolutely a good thing to keep an eye on, right? Because it gives us an idea of maybe what to expect in the future, because we need to get prepared for that. Now, that's why I wanted to answer your second question first, because it has a lot to do with funding. All of this that you see here today takes months of preparation. So we're very lucky that the United States always gives us an idea of their ability to support our programs far in advance. So it means that we can start to import food where is necessary, we can start to procure food in the country or in the region if necessary. And we need to also work with the government to determine who goes where, how many people would be in need of assistance. So a lot of work goes into that, and that's why I made a point of appreciating everybody who gets involved, because this was not set up yesterday. The preparations for a program like this start many, many months in advance. So right now, of course, we had hoped to provide much more contribution to the national program than we are doing. But as you said, the global circumstances in the world are such that there are very large crises elsewhere, and it's then difficult for the donors to prioritize Zimbabwe within that context. For the next lean season, so for, let's say, October onwards, this is where we now need to start having conversations between us, with other donors as well, because we need to start having a look at how the harvest is, well, not even the harvest, how the planting is happening right now. Right? The rain is coming, is it coming at the right time, at the right quantities? What will that likely tell us for next year? And so that funding gap right now, I could tell you a number, but there's not an awful lot of purpose to it, because even if somebody would come and gives the money tomorrow, it would be late to be able to do something with that money. What we need to do now is monitor this season so that we get prepared for next year. Yeah.
And maybe, yes, thank you. And just to complement, I think again, as Francesca noted, it takes a lot that goes into the planning, the projections. I think, as we know, here in Zimbabwe, we've been waiting for rain since October and trying to predict when they will come, the impacts that it will have. I think it's why it's so important, our work with WFP, to help identify those individuals who are in the greatest needs. And it's why we target specifically, and also why we focus on this peak hunger period, from now, starting now through March, to make sure that the support that we have covers that peak season as we continue to project the greatest need. And it's that analysis that also allows us to advocate for support for Zimbabwe, because as you mentioned, there are truly needs around the world. And it takes that analysis, we use that analysis to be able to advocate for those of greatest need.
Next questions?
Sure.
This could be the shortest press conference in history. No other questions? Mariah coming back?
Mariah, you can tell us the media.
AP. And then I also want to find out in terms of the worst affected areas, is it urban areas, the rural areas? Do we have food deserts depending in urban areas, if there's any such constraint?
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Yeah, very good question. It's somewhat a little bit of a technical question also, because I've just mentioned the Food and Nutrition Council takes the lead in convening this Vulnerability Assessment Committee. And the assessment that I referred to that was undertaken in May last year focused specifically to rural areas. And this happens every year. Every year there is one assessment that focuses on rural areas. Now, a few years ago, the ZimVac, as it is called in short, also realized that it's important to also get an idea of what's happening in urban areas. And in urban areas, a separate assessment takes place, usually in December, January, and I believe that it is planned for this month. Now, that means that the last assessment that was undertaken is from December 2022. And that report suggests that about 1.5 million people in urban areas did not have the means to access enough cereals on a daily basis. Now, the difference between the urban assessment and the rural assessment is that the urban assessment takes a measurement on the day that the questions are asked. So the analysis applies to the moment the assessment takes place. Whereas for the rural assessment, it's a prediction into the future. So it's slightly different in terms of how to interpret that, but it does mean that some 1.5 million people out of the 5 million people who live in urban areas in Zimbabwe were found to be food insecure in December 2022. And so that is, well, anybody with quick mathematical skills, 1.5 out of 5, so we're like 30%, something like that. Right? And in rural areas, we're about 2.7 million people out of about 10 million people. So it's slightly less, but it is more or less similar, right, in terms of percentages of people, both in urban areas and in rural areas. Now, their issues are very different. Right? In rural areas, people are dependent a lot on the seasons. They're depending on their ability, mostly, to also grow their own food. Right? So they're dependent on the harvest that is made possible by the seasons. And if then the rain is like this, right, and it comes very late, or it's very hot, right, then they are very much dependent on that. In urban areas, it's actually surprising to see how many people also grow food. Right? But it's not seasonal as much as it is in rural areas. But a lot of people in urban areas rely on income to buy food from the market. Right? So for them, seasonality matters because prices are different dependent on the season. And we all experience that when we go to the market or to the shops and you see prices fluctuate. Now, for urban populations, because of inflation, because of price fluctuations, even in fuel, have a consequence for the price of food in the market. So the issues that they are dealing with are different. Sometimes then that also means that the solution for them would be different. So it's a very important thing to keep an eye on, and we are very much keen to work with the FNC to make sure that this new urban assessment can take place, so that we have a new and up-to-date understanding of what the situation is in the urban areas.
Thank you. And I'd like to compliment, I'm going to ask our office director with USAID just to add on. As you mentioned, it's a very important question, and it's why also we focus on programs that address both the short-term needs as well as the long-term. So maybe, Mary Alice, if I could ask you to talk about a bit more about some of the urban programming we're doing here.
Sure. Thanks very much. Yes, we do also program in urban areas. We're working with partners in Harare itself, but also with WFP and other urban areas. This assistance started during COVID, and it's still quite new for the Humanitarian Assistance Office to be programming in urban areas. And we are learning a lot as we're moving forward in terms of the hows of working with vulnerable populations and the market situation, the livelihood situation in urban areas, and how to really target the most vulnerable, because there is a lot of vulnerability. And there's, as you know, in places in Harare, there's a lot of overcrowding and needs, and so really finding the most vulnerable among the urban areas was the first challenge that we've been learning about. And then I'll hand it over to Arena to talk a little bit more about, if you want to talk about the other partners or with WFP specifically.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Thank you for that great question. As much as we are addressing the issues that are being faced in the rural areas, we are also working in the urban areas, like she mentioned. So we are doing cash flow work in the urban areas. We are also doing livelihood support with WFP and also with our other partners in the urban areas. And since 2019, we have been expanding. We started off with a few districts, and now we are in about 10 districts in the urban areas. Thanks.
Could you pass the mic to Sharita?
Yes, all the voices.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Because I think it's maybe also good to say something about the combination between the resilience and the cash in urban areas. Huh?
Yeah, I'll just complement what has been said. As WFP, we are also supporting urban communities with cash-based transfers for households to meet their immediate needs. But as has been highlighted by Francesca, urban vulnerabilities are very complex, such that we had to find a way of layering our cash-based transfers with resilience building activities, because the urban population is not, like they are very much dependent on the incomes that they get from different livelihood activities. It's easy for them to fall back to vulnerability when they are met by different shocks. So providing support to meet immediate needs alone will not help them, because it would mean we need to support them for forever, of which it's not possible. Resources are not infinite. So the resilience building component of our programming is meant for these households, while they are meeting their immediate needs, to also find their feet in terms of income generating activities and other income raising ventures like poultry and the like, so that when it's time for us to stop the cash-based transfers, depending on resource availability, at least they've got something to fall back on their own. They would have developed a bit of some self-reliance through the resilience building activities. So at some point we were doing a bit of a combination of both cash transfers and resilience building activities in 23 domains. But currently we are doing cash-based transfers in 2 ongoing domains with plans to expand to 3 more domains, and then resilience building layered with other activities in some of these domains. So I think that's all.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? 2 questions here.
Well, thank you. Costa Nkomo, freelance journalist. I just wanted to find out how you are managing, because traditionally we know that in this country food aid is always influenced by political affiliations. Communities have been always complaining. What measures have you put in place that yes, you are going to distribute this aid? We want to hear from communities complaining that they are not being given aid because they belong to certain political entities. Thank you.
Yeah. I think from our side, I can say that there is a very strict methodology that is involved in identifying the areas, larger district areas within the districts, selection and ranking of the wards. Within the wards, the community at large is involved in the identification of the most vulnerable households. We use a checklist of critical criteria, or let's say family characteristics that make people more vulnerable or more prone to vulnerability. And some of these characteristics actually come from the ZimVac assessment itself. So having clear methodology guidelines, having clear criteria, having open and transparent community engagement, I think goes a long way. Now, on top of that, we monitor and oversee all these activities with our partners to make sure that there's nothing out of the ordinary that is happening. We've made it very clear across the board and also quite publicly that this food is for the most vulnerable, and there should be no bias in any way, whether it's political, whether it's religious, whether it's ethnic, whether it has to do with gender, age, disability. None of that is acceptable. That's on the program implementation side. Now, what we also have in place is a community feedback mechanism, which consists of a help desk on site, which also takes complaints from people who have not been selected. There is a box where people can anonymously put something in there to share their concerns, and we have a hotline. And so there is a telephone number that people can call, that anybody can call, if they have a concern about the program. People also call to ask questions. People call to say, oh, you know, they need a PIN number, for example, for the distribution. Say they call, I lost my PIN number, can you help me? So that hotline is really in use for a variety of things, but it also invites people to come forward if they believe that the program is not fair. And we do get quite a number of people calling the hotline. Luckily, not many to complain about fairness, but there are quite a number of people who are asking, why am I not eligible? Why is my neighbor considered to be eligible? Why am I not eligible? And so then we do get a lot of questions, and we follow up on every single one of the callers' concerns. And so that's from the front end, as well as then on the back end, we make sure that we have systems in place that catch any kind of bias if it may occur.
Yeah, and just to say, some of those processes will include beneficiary verification. So after the targeting takes place, there is a spot check, randomized check to go back through and make sure that the targeting is correct. There's also post-distribution monitoring. So after the food is distributed, there is another process to make sure that that food is, has been received and is accounted for. Okay.
There's one more, I think. One more.
Just to add one point that in addition to what has been said, we also ensure that at each point when we are commencing the LSA program, there is intensive training of all the people that are involved, our cooperating partners, our WFP staff, and in those trainings we also have key stakeholders, so that everyone understands the objectives of the program, the criteria, and most importantly, that they also understand how to deal with any cases should there be such instances as you have highlighted.
There was another question over there.
I think she moved.
Oh, you moved there. Okay. I'm sorry. Could you move? Like, I can't see you at all with the lights. Or maybe take one step to your left. Yay, now we can see you.
Hi, Matasa HStvZim. One question we journalists often get asked is, it's raining in parts of Southern Africa, it's raining in Zimbabwe. Why are organizations saying that Zimbabwe, for example, is food insecure? Can you help us explain that to audiences?
Okay, well, it goes back to exactly what I said earlier. Today's need is related to last year's harvest. And that is a bit confusing, because if you go around Zimbabwe, and especially Harare today, everything is so lush and green. So you could say, what's the problem? But what we're dealing with today has to do with the agricultural season from last year. And that is also why we're worried about El Nino today. A lot of rain may look like a good thing, but it falls on the wrong time, and there's too much of it, or there's not enough of it, then it doesn't help farmers to go through their agricultural pattern. There is a time to prepare the land, there's a time to apply fertilizer, there's a time to put in the seeds, then there's need for water, another fertilizer layer. So all these steps require a certain rainfall in the right amount at the right time. So even when it's raining a lot now, as a lay person, you may think, what's the problem? But as a farmer, they may look out of the window and shake their heads and say, this is not what I needed. Not in this quantity, not now. And I think this is why we're monitoring very carefully what is happening, so that it gives us an idea for what the next lean season may possibly look like. Of course, we will have to wait for the next ZIM to take place, so that we have more concrete data, but it starts to give us a proper idea already now in terms of the area planted, what the crop looks like that is on the land, and various different assessments are undertaken in the agricultural sector to give us an idea of the likely outcome of this agricultural season.
Thank you. And maybe just to acknowledge and recognize, I think it's important, as Francesca noted, the number of people involved in doing that analysis and those projections. Because so much of it is that projection. And really trying to predict what the weather conditions will be, and for smallholder farmers, and then based on that, what the need will be. So I want to take the opportunity to just recognize the number of people involved in that analysis and projection, and it's also why, as she noted, it takes the period of time it does to plan accordingly and to think ahead. Thank you for the question.
We'll take our last question before we wrap up.
Good morning once again. My name is Ivan Chakata from the Herald. I wanted to know, how are you going to distribute the food, considering that there's a cholera outbreak? And whenever you distribute people with overcrowding, so I wanted to know how you're going to distribute them.
Okay.
Thank you. Great question. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I have to say, we've had some practice. Because 2-3 years of COVID already required that we make changes to the way that we do distributions. So in the past, we had large groups of people, the community, coming to distribution sites all at once. And during COVID, we realized that that was not sustainable. The risk of transmitting the COVID, the virus, was already quite increased at that time. So we made changes to the way that we do distributions. So people now come in smaller groups. They are clustered by household size. So they go through the distribution site together in smaller groups, and they receive their food together as a group and then distribute among themselves at the distribution site before they leave. Now, at the distribution site during COVID time, we also had hand sanitation stations, for example. Right? We asked people to maintain a distance. So we're drawing from those experiences to put all the measures in place at the distribution sites to make people aware, first of all, about cholera, because this is a great opportunity to bring so many people to the distribution sites, to also pass the messages to them about good hygiene and health, but it's also an opportunity then for us to draw from those experiences to make some adjustments at the distribution site to make sure that they don't become a hotspot of passing the cholera from one person to another.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Francesca and Janine, Mary Alice, Serena, Sharita, Andrew. I'll hand you back to Divya now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, do clap.
They've been standing for like 30 minutes or more now? No, that's a good one. Okay, so we've come to the end of the activity today, the event today. Just one.